The call came while Lena was polishing the glass railing that wrapped around the penthouse balcony. At first, she ignored the vibration in her pocket. She'd learned that habit early. Phones buzzing during work hours usually meant something she couldn't fix right away. But the phone buzzed again. And again. The city stretched beneath her, gray and restless, traffic humming like a living thing. Inside, the apartment was quiet except for the low mechanical whisper of the wheelchair behind her. She wiped her hands on her apron and checked the screen. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. She answered softly. "Hello. Miss Howard?" a man asked. His voice had that flat, careful tone that carried bad news without raising its volume. "This is Officer Daniel Ruiz with the Chicago Police Department." The words that followed came in fragments. Juvenile intake. Vehicle theft. No injuries. Detained for questioning. Lena stopped hearing the rest. Her knees went weak and she leaned against the railing, the cool glass pressing into her spine. She pictured her son's face the last time they'd argued. His jaw set, eyes hard, already somewhere she couldn't reach. "Ma'am?" the officer said. "Are you still there?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm here." When the call ended, she stood frozen, phone dangling from her fingers. For a moment she thought she might throw up. Instead, she swallowed hard and forced her body to move. Inside the living room, Richard Halvorsen sat facing the windows, his back to her. The late afternoon light cut across the polished floor, catching the edges of framed art and the chrome details of his wheelchair. He hadn't moved since she'd stepped onto the balcony. Lena tried to breathe normally. She walked to the side table and straightened a stack of magazines that didn't need straightening. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Lena," Richard said without turning. "You missed a spot." She flinched. "I'm sorry." "Oh. No," he said calmly. "Don't." She stopped. The silence stretched. Richard's reflection hovered in the glass, his face lined but composed, as if emotion were something he'd negotiated away years ago. "You're distracted," he continued. "That usually means something's wrong." Lena opened her mouth to deny it. The lie sat ready, familiar and practiced. Instead, nothing came out. The dam broke quietly. "My son," she said. Her voice sounded far away to her own ears. "He's been arrested." Richard turned his head slightly. "Not fully. Just enough." "For what?" She hesitated. "They said he was in a stolen car." Richard absorbed this without visible reaction. "Is he hurt?" "No." "Anyone else?" "No." Another pause. He nodded once like a man checking boxes on a list. "You should go," he said. "I can't," she replied automatically. "I'm on shift." "That's irrelevant," he said. "Call your sister. Or whoever watches him." "I don't have anyone," Lena said. The words landed heavier than she expected. Richard's fingers tightened on the armrest. "You're telling me now?" "I'm telling you because I don't know what else to do." She hadn't planned to say more. But the room felt too large, too quiet, like it was waiting for the truth to show itself. "They said he could be charged," she added. "They said, adult charges." Richard finally turned to face her fully. For the first time since she'd met him, his composure cracked. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal something sharp underneath. "Recognition, maybe. Or memory." "How old?" he asked. 16. Richard exhaled slowly through his nose. "Sit down." Lena sat. Her legs felt like they might give out anyway. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The city outside kept moving. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and faded. "I can't lose him," Lena said suddenly. "I know I haven't done everything right. I know I worked too much. I know I missed things. But I can't." Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together, trying to contain it. "I can't let the system swallow him." Richard watched her carefully, like a man evaluating risk. "What exactly are you asking me for?" he said. The question hung in the air. Lena looked down at her hands. They were clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Pride told her to stand up, to apologize, to take it back. Fear spoke louder. She raised her eyes to his. "Please help me, sir." The words sounded ugly, bare, like something torn loose. Richard did not recoil. He did not soften either. He studied her for a long moment, then looked past her toward the window again. "You may not like the kind of help I give," he said quietly. Lena nodded. "I don't have the luxury of liking it." A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. "That's usually how it starts." Outside, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in off the lake. The apartment lights flicked on automatically, one by one, bathing the room in a soft, artificial glow. Richard folded his hands together. "Tell me everything," he said. And as Lena opened her mouth to begin, she had no idea that this moment, this one plea she swore she'd never make, was about to entangle her life with his in ways neither of them could undo. If you're still here listening, you already know this isn't just a story about money or power. It's about moments where one choice changes the direction of everything. And this was only the first. Lena took a breath. Then she started talking. But what Richard heard, and why he listened, would take far longer to understand. Lena learned how to disappear long before she learned how to ask for help. In Pine Grove, Mississippi, disappearing was a survival skill. The town sat between a closed textile mill and a stretch of farmland that never quite paid off. Jobs came and went. People stayed, mostly because leaving cost more than they could manage. Lena grew up in a 2-bedroom rental with peeling paint and a back door that never locked properly. Her father was there until he wasn't. No big fight. No goodbye. Just a morning when his boots were gone from beside the door, and her mother stood at the sink staring at nothing, her hands shaking around a chipped mug. After that, everything became quieter. Her mother, Denise, worked as a dietary aide at a nursing facility. Double shifts when she could get them. Night shifts when her body allowed it. Lena learned how to microwave dinner, how to help with laundry, how to read her mother's face before asking for anything extra. They never talked about being poor. They talked about being careful. Be careful with the lights. Be careful with food. Be careful with your voice. At school, Lena was the kid teachers liked but never remembered. She did her work. She didn't complain. When other kids laughed too loudly, she smiled smaller. When they asked where she lived, she changed the subject. The first time the electricity was shut off, Lena was 10. She did her homework by flashlight while her mother cried quietly in the bathroom, the sound of the fan masking sobs that never fully stayed hidden. That was the night Lena decided she would never be a burden. Her grandmother lived 2 towns over, in a weathered house that smelled like menthol and cornbread. When Denise's back gave out for the first time, Lena moved in to help. Her grandmother had diabetes and a temper sharpened by pain, but she trusted Lena in a way she trusted no one else. "Don't let this world make you hard," her grandmother told her once, wincing as Lena adjusted her leg brace. "But don't let it make you stupid either." Lena carried that sentence with her for years. By the time she finished high school, college brochures felt like jokes mailed to the wrong address. She took a job cleaning rooms at a roadside motel. The work was physical and anonymous, which suited her. She learned efficiency. How to move without being seen. How to leave spaces better than she found them. When she got pregnant at 20, the father vanished before the test strip dried. She didn't chase him. Caleb arrived on a humid August afternoon, small and loud and impossibly warm against her chest. Holding him felt like fear and purpose braided together. She named him because it sounded strong. Because it felt like a promise she could keep. The early years blurred together. Daycare drop-offs, night shifts, borrowed babysitters, cheap dinners eaten standing up. Lena slept in fragments. Loved fiercely. Worried constantly. Her mother died when Caleb was 5. A stroke at work. No warning. Just a phone call and a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and regret. Standing beside her mother's bed, Lena realized something terrifying. She was alone now. No safety net. No backup plan. Just her and a boy who depended on her for everything. She moved through jobs the way some people moved through seasons. Hotel housekeeping, private homes, elder care. She learned how to read people quickly. Which clients wanted conversation. Which wanted silence. Which treated her like furniture. Caleb grew fast. Too fast. He asked questions she didn't always know how to answer. Why did other kids have dads at school events? Why did she always work late? Why did teachers look at him differently when he spoke up? You're smart, she told him. Just don't let your mouth get you in trouble. He grinned. That's what smart mouths do. She laughed, but something in her chest tightened. When the Chicago job offer came, it felt unreal. Live-in position. Full benefits. Salary that made her reread the number twice. The client was wealthy, disabled, and demanding, but stable. Stability was a language Lena understood. She told Caleb it was a fresh start. New city. New school. New chance to get things right. He shrugged, pretending not to care. But the night before they moved, Lena lay awake listening to him breathe, wondering if leaving Pine Grove meant she was running towards something, or away from a future she couldn't fix. And somewhere in that doubt, the first crack began forming, quietly, long before either of them noticed it was there. Motherhood didn't arrive in Lena's life like a miracle. It arrived like a responsibility she couldn't put down. Caleb was 6 weeks old when she went back to work. She left him with a neighbor who charged less because she watched too many kids already. Lena kissed his forehead before sunrise, inhaling that clean, powdery smell, then rode the bus with her breasts aching and her eyes burning from lack of sleep. She told herself this was temporary. Everything hard was temporary if you kept moving. But time had a way of stretching when money stayed tight. Caleb grew into a child who asked questions the way other kids asked for snacks, often and without warning. He wanted to know how things worked, why people acted the way they did. Why some houses had fences and others didn't. Why teachers spoke slowly to some kids but not to him. At night, Lena read library books aloud until her voice cracked. She quizzed him on spelling while folding laundry. She corrected his grammar gently even when he rolled his eyes. You talk like you're older than me, he told her once. That's because I had to grow up fast, she said. So did I, he replied without smiling. It unsettled her how true that already was. When her mother's stroke took her, the world didn't stop. Bills still came. Work still expected her. Caleb still needed breakfast and clean clothes and someone to tuck him in. Grief didn't roar through Lena's life. It seeped in quietly like water through cracked walls. Some days she forgot to cry. Other days she cried in the shower so Caleb wouldn't hear. The Chicago job offer came 2 years later, through a cleaning agency that mostly placed staff in hotels and corporate housing. Lena almost deleted the email, assuming it was spam. When she finally read it, she sat very still on the edge of her bed, rereading the details. Live-in. Health insurance. Salary higher than anything she'd earned before. She accepted within the hour. The move was hard on Caleb, though he tried not to show it. The new school was bigger. Louder. Teachers noticed him more, which wasn't always good. You gotta stop talking back, Lena told him after his first detention. I wasn't talking back, he said. I was explaining. She sighed. Explaining can sound like disrespect. That's not fair, he muttered. Life in Chicago was faster. Sharper. Lena's days blurred together. Early mornings at the penthouse, late nights commuting back to their small apartment, weekends spent catching up on everything she'd missed during the week. At first, Caleb managed. Then small things started to slip. He stopped finishing homework. He forgot chores. He grew defensive over nothing. When Lena asked how school was, he said, "Fine," in a tone that closed the conversation. One evening, she noticed he'd started locking his phone. Why the password? She asked casually. Everybody has one, he replied. She nodded, pretending that was enough. It wasn't. The calls from school came slowly at first. A missed class. A comment taken the wrong way. A teacher concerned about his attitude. He's very intelligent, the counselor said. But he seems angry. Angry felt like a failure Lena didn't know how to fix. Then came the night she found the pills. They were tucked into the small front pocket of his backpack. Lena hadn't been snooping. She was looking for a permission slip. Her fingers brushed plastic instead of paper. Her heart started pounding before her brain caught up. She held the bag up when Caleb walked into the kitchen. "What is this?" she asked. His face changed instantly. "Guard it." "Sure." "Give it back." "Where did you get this?" Her voice shook despite her effort to stay calm. "That's none of your business." Her hand came down before she decided to move it. The sound echoed in the room. Caleb stared at her, stunned. Then his expression hardened into something she'd never seen before. "I hate you," he said quietly. He grabbed his jacket and left. The door slammed so hard the frame rattled. Lena stood there long after the sound faded, her hands still raised, her breath shallow. She told herself he'd cool off. He always did. But the minutes passed. Then an hour. By midnight, panic wrapped around her chest like wire. She called his phone. Straight to voicemail. She sat on the couch, staring at the door, listening for footsteps that didn't come. And for the first time since Caleb was born, Lena realized a terrifying truth. Love alone wasn't keeping him safe anymore. And whatever she was losing control of was already moving faster than she could catch up to. The Chicago skyline looked nothing like Pine Grove. From the bus window, Lena traced the glass towers with her eyes, wondering if the city would swallow her whole. The streets hummed with cars, buses, and people walking fast, shoulders hunched against the wind. She clutched her duffel bag, its strap cutting into her shoulder, and tried to remind herself why she'd agreed to this move. Stability. A paycheck that could stretch further than she'd ever imagined. A chance for Caleb to breathe. The agency assigned her to a penthouse apartment on the north side, overlooking Lake Michigan. It was sleek and modern, every surface polished to a mirror shine. Lena felt the tension in her shoulders ease a little as she stepped inside, though only briefly. The elevator doors opened to a quiet hall, the kind that smelled faintly of disinfectant and new furniture. Lena followed the agent, a woman named Ellen, who moved with brisk efficiency, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "This is Mr. Halvorson's residence," Ellen said. "He's private, disabled, and particular. Follow the rules, respect the routines, and you'll do fine." Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Questions?" Ellen asked, one brow raised. "Just, where do I start?" Lena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ellen smiled faintly, a flash that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "You start by listening. And observing. Everything else will follow." The door to the main living area opened and Lena froze for a moment. Richard Halvorson was there, sitting in a motorized wheelchair facing the windows. His back was straight, shoulders tense but relaxed in a strange balance. Silver hair combed back neatly, hands resting lightly on his lap. His eyes didn't move much, but the air around him made it clear that he was aware of everything. "Ms. Howard," Ellen said, "this is Mr. Halvorson." Richard didn't move his head, didn't speak. He simply observed, like he was noting her presence and deciding what to do with it. Lena swallowed. "Good morning, sir." Richard's lips pressed together, the faintest quirk of a frown. "I know who you are," he said finally, in a tone that was calm but carried weight. "Another one." Ellen's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "She comes highly recommended," she said. "I'm sure," he replied, voice even. Then silence again. Lena shifted, unsure whether to stand still or retreat. She reminded herself that this wasn't a home, it was a workplace. She had a job to do, and her nervousness didn't belong in the room. Ellen gave a small nod. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Lena, familiarize yourself with the daily schedule. Meals, medication, physical therapy, everything is in the binder on the side table. She handed Lena a thick binder and stepped back, leaving her alone with Richard. The quiet pressed in around her. The city noises outside seemed distant, as though the apartment itself existed in a bubble of controlled calm. Richard finally turned his head, just slightly, enough for her to see the sharpness in his eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked. "To work," Lena said softly. "To assist you with your daily needs." He regarded her for a long moment, then inclined his head once. "That will do for now." She moved to the side table, opening the binder, skimming schedules, medication charts, notes on physical therapy routines. Everything was precise, color-coded, organized with the kind of care only wealth and experience could buy. Lena's heart pounded not with fear but with the strange recognition that every detail here mattered, more than it had anywhere else she'd worked. "You will learn quickly," Richard said, voice calm but firm. "Mistakes are costly." "Yes, sir," Lena replied. She noticed her hands shaking slightly and pressed them together in front of her, as if to steady herself. The first few days were a delicate dance. Lena learned when he wanted silence, when he tolerated conversation, how to adjust his wheelchair so he wouldn't strain. She discovered that the apartment had automated lights and shades, but he preferred she handle them manually. He was in control of everything, yet chose to let her act. One evening, while moving a small side table, Lena accidentally knocked a framed photograph from its perch. The glass cracked, falling with a sharp sound against the hardwood. "Oh!" Lena gasped, crouching immediately. Richard didn't flinch. He observed the damage, then said, "It was already cracked. You just finished the job." Lena froze, unsure if relief or embarrassment washed over her first. Later, when she placed the photograph back on the table, she noticed it showed a younger Richard standing beside a teenage boy on a dock. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Something in his posture said that question would not be welcomed. By the end of the first week, Lena realized that working here would not be easy. She would not only have to care for a man who demanded precision, but she would have to read his silences, anticipate his moods, and understand rules that were often unspoken. She was exhausted, but oddly, a part of her felt alive in the challenge. And as she tucked herself into the small room the agency had provided for live-in staff, she wondered, not for the first time, what it would feel like to be seen by someone who rarely looked at anyone at all. Outside, the city lights flickered through the windows, casting shadows that felt like questions, waiting for answers she didn't yet know how to give. Little did Lena know, the first real test of her courage, and of everything she'd survived, was only days away. If you're following Lena's journey so far, don't forget to subscribe to stay with us as her story unfolds, and if you're watching from Chicago, comment below. I'd love to see who's joining this story from the Windy City. Richard Halvorsen didn't greet her like most people did. There was no handshake, no attempt at small talk, no warm smile to soften the edge of authority. Lena learned quickly that mornings were always like this, quiet, tense, and measured. He moved through the apartment with deliberate control, even from his wheelchair, his silver hair glinting under the ceiling lights, hands folded neatly, eyes observing everything and nothing all at once. The first time she served his breakfast, she placed a plate in front of him, hoping to avoid any mistakes. The eggs were slightly overcooked, but she figured it wouldn't matter. She was wrong. "They're fine," Richard said, not looking at her. "Just, next time, check the pan temperature." She nodded, cheeks burning. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every word carried weight, and the pauses between them cut sharper than any anger she had ever encountered. Over the next few days, Lena began to notice patterns. The way he positioned himself to minimize strain. How he asked questions not to learn answers, but to observe how people responded. How his silence could fill a room louder than any outburst. She kept her movements quiet, precise. She realized quickly that in this apartment, mistakes weren't just noticed, they were cataloged. One afternoon, while adjusting the blinds in the living room to reduce the glare from the late afternoon sun, Lena accidentally knocked over a small framed photograph on the side table. The glass cracked against the polished floor. She froze. Her heart leapt into her throat. Richard didn't flinch. He simply looked at the frame, then back at her. "It was already cracked," he said. "You just finished the job." The relief that flooded her was immediate and confusing. She had braced herself for anger, for criticism, for something sharp. But there was none. Just calm observation. She wondered briefly if he had learned to control everything except what could hurt him emotionally. Later she picked up the photo to inspect it. A younger Richard standing beside a teenage boy on a dock somewhere, smiling faintly. A life before the accident. A life she would never fully understand. She felt a strange, sinking curiosity. Who was the boy? Why did he matter enough to be in the frame? She opened her mouth to ask, then shut it again. Some questions, she realized, weren't meant to be answered yet. Richard, meanwhile, had begun to watch her more closely. Not just for mistakes, but for hesitations, for expressions, for the unspoken. Lena felt it keenly, as if every step she took in the apartment was under silent audit. She reminded herself daily, this was a job, a paycheck, stability. And stability required endurance. Evenings were harder. Lena would sit in the small room provided for staff, the city lights of Chicago glimmering beyond her window, and replay the day's moments in her mind. She realized she was learning a new kind of discipline, not just in housekeeping but in survival. Reading moods, anticipating needs, holding back questions that might provoke him unnecessarily. And yet, for all the distance he maintained, Lena sometimes caught glimpses of something else in his eyes. Not warmth exactly. Not even vulnerability. But recognition. Awareness. A hint that behind the meticulous control, there was a man who had seen life change him in ways he hadn't recovered from. She wondered if he noticed her watching him, wondering about him in return. That evening, she arranged his medication for the night, aligning each pill carefully with the schedule in the binder Ellen had provided. Her hands shook slightly, not from fatigue but from the weight of responsibility. She realized that even the smallest oversight could have consequences, even if Richard didn't speak about them. As she placed the last pill beside the others, she looked at him. For the first time, he made a small, almost imperceptible nod toward her. Just a slight acknowledgement that he had noticed her effort. It was fleeting, but it lingered. And somewhere in that subtle gesture, Lena felt the stirrings of a question she hadn't dared to ask herself before. Could she possibly care for this man without losing herself in the process? Outside, the city pulsed with its usual relentless rhythm, oblivious to the quiet tension inside the penthouse. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, knowing that this was only the beginning, and that the real challenges were still waiting, just beyond the edges of her cautious awareness. The next day promised the first real test of her observation, her patience, and perhaps even her courage. And Lena had no idea that a small mistake, or a quiet question, could change everything in ways she had not imagined. Something was coming. She could feel it. A knock at the door later that evening hinted at the first ripple that would disrupt the delicate balance she had begun to establish. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Lena discovered the photograph that would haunt her thoughts for days. She had been dusting the side table in the living room, moving carefully around the wheelchair, when her elbow brushed the frame. The glass shifted and she caught it just before it fell. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of breaking it, but from curiosity she couldn't yet name. The photo was small, framed in polished mahogany. It showed a younger Richard, perhaps in his mid-30s, standing on a wooden dock beside a teenage boy. The boy's face was familiar in some way, though Lena couldn't place why. Both were smiling, but there was something fragile about the moment. A fleeting connection that the years had probably eroded, yet the camera had preserved. Lena considered asking about it, her curiosity gnawing at her. But she knew better than to question directly. Richard was a man who measured every word, every pause, every reaction. She didn't know what would happen if she spoke before he was ready. Instead, she replaced the photo on the table, aligning it precisely, and stepped back. Richard, who had been quietly reading documents on his tablet, didn't comment. He didn't even glance at her. And yet, Lena felt the weight of the unspoken. The photo was a key to a past he rarely revealed, and she had stumbled onto it unintentionally. Later that evening, she found herself replaying the image in her mind. Who was the boy? A son? A nephew? An old friend? Each possibility carried questions she wasn't prepared to ask. She realized that Richard's life, which seemed so controlled and contained, had corners she would never fully understand unless he chose to show them. The days that followed were quiet but charged with subtle tension. Richard maintained his usual routines: meals, medication, physical therapy, but there were moments when Lena caught him staring into space, eyes softening just slightly. The photo lingered in her thoughts, like a puzzle piece that refused to fit anywhere else. One evening, while preparing his dinner, Lena noticed a small box tucked under the sideboard. It was unassuming, yet something about it drew her attention. She hesitated, then carefully pulled it out. Inside were letters, photographs, and clippings that spoke of a life filled with loss and responsibility. Lena skimmed briefly, careful not to linger too long. She felt the sharp edge of someone's grief pressing through the paper, and she wondered how much of that grief had shaped the man before her. Richard's voice startled her. "That's private," he said quietly, not accusatory, just matter of fact. Lena froze. She placed the box back exactly where she had found it, aligning it with the furniture. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. He nodded once, returning his attention to the tablet. The moment passed, but the questions remained. Lena realized that understanding Richard's past might be impossible, or at least it would take time, patience, and careful observation. That night, as she lay on the narrow cot in the staff room, Lena thought about her own son, Caleb, and the fragility of trust and connection. She wondered what it meant to care for someone whose life was so carefully guarded. She felt a pang of empathy for Richard, a man who had lost pieces of himself yet still demanded precision and control. The photograph lingered in her mind, a symbol of the untold stories hidden behind Richard's composed exterior. And she understood, perhaps for the first time, that her job was more than cleaning and caregiving. It was about navigating the delicate terrain of someone else's life, one careful step at a time. As she drifted to sleep, the city lights of Chicago flickered through the window, shadows dancing across the walls. Lena didn't know it yet, but the photograph would become a quiet thread weaving through her days, slowly pulling her closer to the truths Richard had kept hidden, and to the decisions she would soon face that could change everything. And in that quiet moment before dawn, a feeling settled over her, that life in this apartment, with all its routines and silences, was about to shift in ways she could not yet imagine. Something was coming, something that would challenge not only her skills as a caregiver but the very heart she thought she had learned to protect. Caleb had always been a spirited child, but lately, Lena felt him slipping through her fingers. The first signs were small: missed homework, shrugged off chores, a defiant glance that seemed bigger than his 13 years. She chalked it up to adolescence at first, convincing herself it was normal. But then the calls from school began. "Lena Howard?" a voice would say, polite but urgent. "This is Mrs. Patel, Caleb's counselor at Lincoln Middle. We're concerned about some recent behavior." Each call tightened a knot in her stomach. Lena would sit at the kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the words, and feel her chest ache with helplessness. She knew Caleb was intelligent. He could read faster than his peers, solve problems in his head that others struggled with on paper. But intelligence didn't shield him from the anger and fear simmering under his skin. The evenings became a minefield. Lena would ask about school and he'd mutter, "Fine," and retreat to his room. She'd knock softly, asking questions, only to be met with silence or sarcasm. Every interaction left her exhausted, questioning whether she was doing enough or too much. One rainy Thursday, she discovered Caleb had been skipping classes. She found a note from the principal tucked into his backpack, folded neatly like it had been rehearsed. Repeated absences. Urgent conference required. Lena's hands shook as she read it. She placed the note on the counter, staring at the words as if they were moving, rearranging themselves into something incomprehensible. "Caleb," she said when he returned home, rain dripping from his hair. "We need to talk." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "About what?" "School. Absences. I got a note from the principal." He rolled his eyes. "It's nothing. Don't worry." "Nothing? You're missing classes. You're getting in trouble." "This isn't nothing, Caleb." Her voice trembled, but she held it steady. He looked at her, and for a moment, Lena saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or defiance sharpened by desperation. "You don't get it," he snapped. "You're never here anyway. You work all the time. Why do you care now?" The words cut deeper than she expected. She wanted to shout, to cry, to explain that every decision she had made had been for him. Instead, she swallowed the lump in her throat and tried to stay calm. "I care because I have to," she said softly. "Because if I don't, no one else will." He didn't respond. He shoved his hands into his wet jacket pockets and went to his room, slamming the door. Lena stood in the hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of him pacing back and forth, anger and fear colliding in ways she couldn't fix. That night, sleep evaded her. She sat on the edge of the bed, Caleb's absence from school replaying like a broken record in her mind. She thought of Pine Grove, the struggles she had survived there, and the life she had built in Chicago, and yet none of it seemed to prepare her for this. The next morning brought a call from the school again. This time it wasn't a counselor, it was an administrator. "We need to see you and Caleb today," the voice said, firm and clipped. "This is serious." Her heart sank. She tried to calm herself as she hung up. This wasn't just about missed homework or detentions. Something was building, something that could spiral into consequences she couldn't contain. She caught herself thinking about Richard, sitting quietly in his penthouse, watching the city through his large windows. He had control over everything in his environment, precision in every detail, yet even he could not shield himself from life's unpredictability. Lena realized that no matter how careful she was, some things, anger, fear, rebellion, were beyond her control. By the time Caleb returned home that evening, Lena had made a decision. She would confront him directly, no half measures, no excuses. They would talk, and she would make him see that the choices he made now had weight, more than he could yet understand. But when she opened the door to his room, it was empty. The window was open, rain dripping onto the sill. A chill ran down her spine. And in that moment, Lena understood something terrifying. Caleb wasn't just acting out anymore. He was slipping away from her completely. She ran to the window, peering into the darkened alley below, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. Her stomach twisted. Every scenario ran through her mind: injury, trouble with the law, worse. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone and dialed, her fingers trembling as each ring echoed in the empty apartment. No answer. And then, a realization hit her like ice water. She might not be able to save him this time, not with words, not with love, not with everything she had fought to give him. The first real crisis of their new life had arrived. And Lena, for the first time in years, felt utterly powerless. The night was colder than usual, the kind of January chill that seeps through the cracks in apartment windows and sticks to your bones. Lena paced the small living room, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for the Chicago Police Department to answer for the 5th time. Each ring sounded like a drum in her chest, a reminder that time was slipping, and so was her grip on Caleb. Finally, a voice answered. "Police Department, what's your emergency?" "My son," Lena said, barely able to breathe. "He's missing. Caleb Howard. 16. I think he might have. Calm down, ma'am, the officer said, steadying her with his tone. Where was he last seen? She rattled off the address, the street, his school. Her words spilled out too fast, each sentence punctuated by her frantic heartbeats. Stay on the line. We'll dispatch someone, the officer said. Lena's throat went dry. She sank into the couch, pulling her legs close, trying to make herself smaller, like shrinking could somehow contain the panic. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. She didn't notice the time. She just kept waiting, listening to the city outside hum with indifference. Sirens in the distance reminded her that life moved on for everyone else, while her son was out there somewhere, possibly in danger. Then her phone rang. A withheld number. Lena's stomach flipped. Miss Howard. The voice was calm, but she recognized the authority immediately. This is Officer Ruiz. We have Caleb. Relief and terror collided in a wave that left her dizzy. Where? Is he hurt? No injuries, the officer said. He was found in a stolen car. We'll need you to come to the station. The world narrowed to the drive over, the sirens passing her in the other lanes, the city lights blurring into streaks of red and white. Lena gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. At the juvenile intake office, she saw him for the first time since he left. Caleb sat on the edge of a metal bench, hood pulled over his head, arms crossed. His expression was defiant, his eyes avoiding hers. Lena's chest ached. Caleb, she said softly, moving closer. I didn't do anything wrong, he snapped. His voice was sharp, defensive. Why are you here? I'm your mother, she said quietly. And I'm here because I need to make sure you're safe. He looked away, jaw tight. Lena recognized the stubborn streak in him, the same one that had made him brilliant but also reckless. The intake officer cleared his throat. Miss Howard, you'll need to sign some paperwork. Then we can discuss next steps. She did, every signature feeling like a small admission of failure. Every stamp of her name a reminder that love wasn't always enough to keep a child from danger. Back at the apartment later that night, Lena sat in silence, Caleb asleep in his room. She thought about the bus rides, the nights working double shifts, the decisions she'd made that had brought them here. She felt guilt, deep, gnawing guilt. She tried to convince herself she had done her best, but the image of him behind bars, however briefly, haunted her. She realized that her world had narrowed to this single fragile point, keeping Caleb safe in a city that seemed too big, too fast, and too indifferent to care. The next morning she returned to work at the penthouse, trying to mask the exhaustion and fear. Richard noticed, of course. He always noticed. You look tired, he said, voice calm but with an edge of observation. Did something happen? Lena hesitated. Should she tell him? Could she tell him? Finally she shook her head. Just a rough night. Richard studied her silently, then turned his attention back to the window. Lena felt the weight of his gaze even without seeing it directly. She knew he understood more than she said. But she also knew that he would not offer help unless she asked, and even then his help might come with its own terms. That evening, Lena tucked herself into the small staff room, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. Her thoughts circled Caleb's face, the fear, the anger, the defiance. She realized that this was only the beginning, that keeping him safe would demand more than vigilance, more than rules, more than love. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the city outside, Lena made a decision she had never thought she would. If she had to beg, if she had to set aside pride, she would do it. Because protecting her son wasn't about dignity. It was about survival. And the moment was coming when she would have no choice but to speak the words she had always feared. Please, help me, sir. The next morning, Lena woke before the sun. Chicago was still dark outside her window, the faint hum of traffic below the penthouse barely audible over her own heartbeat. She sat on the edge of the cot in the small staff room, staring at the wall, wondering how to face the day. Caleb was asleep in his room, But she knew his absence from yesterday hadn't just shaken her. It had shaken something inside him too. By the time she reached the kitchen in the penthouse, Richard was already awake, his wheelchair positioned perfectly near the window. The light from the city reflected off the lake in silvery streaks, casting long shadows across the room. Lena felt a familiar weight press on her chest. He always seemed to know things, details she hadn't spoken aloud, fears she hadn't admitted to anyone. "Good morning," she said softly, careful not to let the tension in her voice show. Richard didn't respond immediately. He turned slightly, just enough for his eyes to meet hers. There was a calm intensity there that always unnerved her. "Rough night?" he asked finally, voice low but steady. She hesitated, the words she wanted to say tangled in her throat. "You could say that," she admitted. I had to handle something with my son." Richard nodded once, expression unreadable. "Tell me about it." The words came out in a rush, the dam finally breaking. She explained Caleb's disappearance, the call from the police, the stolen car. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She didn't pause for effect. She simply told him everything, her voice rising slightly at moments, faltering at others. Richard listened in silence. His hands rested lightly on his lap, fingers occasionally tapping, like he was counting or calculating. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "He's your responsibility," he said finally. "Not a judgment. Not a lecture. Just a statement." "Yes," Lena said. "And I can't keep him safe alone. I've tried and it's not enough." Her voice cracked. "I need help." For a moment Richard said nothing. The apartment felt too quiet. Even the city seemed to hush, as though holding its breath. Then he looked directly at her, eyes sharp and assessing. "You want my help?" Lena swallowed hard. "Yes, please." He didn't nod, didn't smile. He just studied her as if weighing her sincerity. Then slowly he said, "You may not like the way I help. My methods aren't soft." "I don't care," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I need him safe." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well. But understand this. Once I involve myself, the situation changes. There will be expectations, rules, discipline. Do you accept that?" "Yes," Lena said immediately. "Anything." He exhaled again, a quiet sound that seemed to release the tension in the room. "Then we begin tomorrow. I'll need details, everything about his habits, friends, patterns. Nothing is irrelevant." She nodded, suddenly feeling both relieved and nervous. Relief because she finally had an ally who could help her navigate this, and nervous because she sensed that Richard's way of helping wouldn't be easy. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Lena went through the apartment's routines mechanically, arranging meals, checking schedules, adjusting the blinds and lights. Every time she glanced at Richard, she felt the weight of what she had asked. He hadn't agreed lightly. And she had a growing sense that his help would come with challenges she couldn't yet predict. That evening, after Caleb returned from school, Lena tried to gauge his mood. He was quiet, distant, and defensive as usual. She couldn't force him to open up, couldn't make him understand why yesterday had been so dangerous. As she prepared his dinner, Lena felt a flicker of fear. She had taken a huge step by asking Richard for help, but she knew that the next days would test her limits. Would Caleb respond? Would Richard's methods work? Or would they ignite new conflicts she wasn't ready to handle? She carried those questions with her as she cleaned up, feeling the apartment's polished surfaces reflect more than the city lights. They reflected the uncertainty and tension settling into her life. When she finally went to bed, Lena lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about the choice she had made, about asking for help, about the consequences yet to come. She knew one thing with certainty. The fragile balance she had built with Caleb, with her own life, was about to shift in ways she could not yet see. And somewhere in the silence of the penthouse, she sensed that this help, this alliance with Richard Halvorsen, would change everything. Tomorrow the real work would begin. and Lena didn't know if she was ready for what that would bring. The next morning, Lena arrived at the penthouse earlier than usual. The city was still draped in the soft gray of dawn, and the wind off Lake Michigan made the windows rattle slightly. She carried a notebook in one hand, a list of Caleb's habits, friends, and routines, compiled over the past week. Richard sat in his usual spot, wheelchair positioned perfectly, hands folded in his lap, eyes scanning the skyline as if he were calculating something she couldn't see. "You have it?" he asked, voice low but cutting through the quiet. "Yes, sir," Lena replied, setting the notebook on the counter. She could feel the weight of his gaze. He didn't glance at her like a normal person. He measured her, reading intent, sincerity, even hesitation. Richard opened the notebook slowly, flipping through pages, pausing at details Lena thought trivial. Caleb's favorite snack, the route he walked home from school, his favorite video games. She realized quickly that to him, nothing was trivial. Everything mattered. "Good," he said finally, closing the notebook. "We begin tonight." Lena's stomach tightened. Tonight meant the first active step of his intervention, and she wasn't sure Caleb would respond well. She'd spent years trying to guide him gently, with patience and understanding. Richard had a different method, and it carried a weight that was hard to measure. The hours dragged. Lena followed the usual routines, meals, cleaning, laundry, but her mind kept returning to Caleb. She tried to anticipate his moods, his reactions, his possible resistance. Every small sound from his room, the creak of the bed, the shuffle of feet, made her heart jump. Finally, evening arrived. Lena prepared Caleb's dinner, placing it on the table with care, noting every detail Richard had mentioned: timing, portion size, presentation. When she called him to eat, he trudged to the table, expression guarded. Richard wheeled closer, silent until he reached the dining area. Lena felt Caleb stiffen, his eyes flicking between her and the man she had just begged for help. "Sit," Richard said, voice calm but commanding. Caleb obeyed, though reluctantly, as if testing the limits of this strange authority. "You understand why I'm here," Richard said quietly, addressing both of them. "Rules are not suggestions. Consequences are not punishments, they are expectations. Your safety, your choices, and the outcomes are all linked." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "I don't need anyone telling me what to do," he muttered. Lena placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Not punishment, Caleb. Help. Guidance." Richard watched the exchange without speaking, letting Caleb squirm under the weight of unspoken observation. Lena realized that he was letting Caleb confront authority, but on his own terms, while maintaining control of the environment. After dinner, Lena cleared the table as Richard quietly observed. Then he spoke again, his tone firmer. "He will meet with me tomorrow. No excuses. He will answer questions honestly." Caleb's jaw tightened, a silent rebellion brewing. Lena felt her chest ache. She had agreed to Richard's help, but watching her son bristle under his scrutiny made her question whether she had bitten off more than she could handle. Richard leaned back, hands resting lightly on the wheelchair controls. "You are doing well, Miss Howard," he said, looking at Lena. "But understand this, intervention is uncomfortable. You may not like what comes next." "I understand, sir," Lena said, voice steady, though anxiety prickled beneath her skin. That night, as Lena lay on her cot in the staff room, she replayed the evening over and over. Caleb's defiance, Richard's calm authority, her own quiet fear, all mixed together into a tension she couldn't shake. She knew the coming days would test every skill she had, every ounce of patience, every instinct as a mother. And somewhere deep down she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this structured, disciplined intervention could reach Caleb in a way she hadn't been able to. But the flicker was faint. And Lena knew better than to rely on hope alone. Because change, especially with teenagers and the weight of past mistakes, never came easily. And tomorrow, she realized, would mark the first real turning point. Something was about to happen that would force all three of them, Lena, Caleb, and Richard, into a confrontation none of them could predict. A confrontation that would leave scars, but perhaps also open doors. And Lena, for the first time since coming to the penthouse, wondered if she had prepared herself enough to face it. The meeting happened the next afternoon. Lena hadn't told Caleb what to expect. She only told him to come straight home after school and not make plans. He didn't argue, which worried her more than if he had. He came in quietly, dropped his backpack near the door, and went straight to the dining area where Richard waited. Richard had repositioned the room. The chairs were aligned differently. The curtains were half open, letting in just enough daylight to feel exposed. The television was off. No distractions. No comforts. The space felt intentional, almost like an interview room disguised as a living area. Caleb stopped when he saw him. "You said tomorrow," Caleb muttered, eyes flicking to Lena. Richard didn't look at Lena. He looked only at Caleb. "It is tomorrow." Caleb exhaled sharply through his nose but sat down. He slouched at first, then straightened slightly when Richard didn't speak right away. Silence stretched. Long enough to feel heavy. Long enough to make Caleb shift. Finally Richard spoke. "Tell me about the car." Caleb's shoulders tensed. "I already told the cops." "I'm not the police," Richard said calmly. "I don't care about the charge. I care about the choice." Caleb hesitated. Lena stayed quiet, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She resisted every instinct to jump in, to soften the moment. "It wasn't stolen," Caleb said finally. "Not really." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "It belonged to a guy I know," Caleb said. "He said we could take it. Just for a drive." "And you believed him," Richard said. Caleb shrugged. "Why wouldn't I?" Richard leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Because people who give teenagers cars don't give them permission. They give them responsibility they don't want." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about him." Richard didn't argue. He changed direction. "Why were you there?" Caleb's eyes flicked toward Lena. Then away. "Because I didn't want to be here." The words landed harder than Lena expected. She felt them physically, like a sharp pressure in her chest. "Here," Richard repeated. "Meaning your home. Or meaning your life." Caleb swallowed. For a moment, Lena thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice dropped. "Both." The room went still. Lena stared at her son. She had known he was unhappy. She hadn't known it was this deep. Richard didn't rush him. He let the silence do its work. "You think running makes you invisible," Richard said eventually. "But it does the opposite. Puts a spotlight on you. Police, courts, records, systems that don't forget." Caleb looked up sharply. "You think I don't know that?" "I think you don't care," Richard replied. "And that's more dangerous." Caleb's hands curled into fists. "You don't get it. I mess up once and that's it. Teachers already expect it. They look at me like I'm trouble before I even say anything." Lena's breath caught. She had suspected this. Hearing it said out loud made it worse. Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. Some people have already decided who you are." Caleb looked surprised. "But," Richard continued, "the mistake you're making is thinking that gives you permission to decide it too." Caleb scoffed. "Easy for you to say." Richard's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. "You think I was born in this chair?" he asked quietly. Lena froze. Caleb stared at him. "What?" "I walked," Richard said. "I ran companies from factory floors. I shook hands standing up." Caleb's posture shifted. "Then what happened?" Richard held his gaze. Someone else's bad decision. A driver who thought one shortcut didn't matter. The air in the room thickened. "I spent months thinking my life was over," Richard said. "I thought I'd been reduced to whatever people saw when they looked at me. And for a while, I let that be true." Caleb didn't speak. He didn't move. "The difference," Richard said, "is that I stopped letting my anger drive the car. Lena watched her son carefully. She saw the flicker of something behind his eyes. Not defiance. Not fear. Recognition. Richard leaned back. You don't need saving, Caleb. You need direction. And direction requires honesty. Caleb swallowed hard. About what? About why you're really angry, Richard said. And who you're trying to punish. Caleb's gaze dropped to the floor. His voice came out quieter. I don't know. Richard nodded once. Then we'll start there. Lena felt a strange mix of relief and dread. This wasn't a lecture. It wasn't discipline. It was something deeper. And as Caleb sat there, silent and tense, Lena realized something unsettling. Richard wasn't just helping her son. He was seeing parts of Caleb that she hadn't been able to reach. And for the first time since she begged for help, Lena wondered what Richard truly intended to do next, and whether she was ready for the cost of it. The rules began the very next morning. They weren't written down. There was no dramatic announcement. No raised voices. Richard didn't believe in spectacle. He believed in structure. Caleb noticed it immediately. His phone disappeared from the kitchen counter before he could grab it. His backpack had been moved from its usual spot. Even the Wi-Fi password no longer worked. Lena watched it happen in silence, her heart thudding as Caleb's confusion turned to irritation. Hey, he said sharply, turning to her. What's going on? Richard rolled in from the living room, calm and unhurried. You'll get it back, he said. When you earn it. Caleb scoffed. You can't do that. I can, Richard replied. Because your mother agreed I could. Caleb's head snapped toward Lena. You let him. Lena swallowed. Her voice was steady, but it took effort. Yes, I did. The look on Caleb's face wasn't anger at first. It was something closer to betrayal. So you're just handing me over? He asked. No, Lena said quickly. I'm standing with you. Even if it feels different. Caleb shook his head and stormed toward his room, stopping short when Richard spoke again. You're not grounded, Richard said. You're accountable. There's a difference. Caleb paused but didn't respond. He shut his door hard enough to rattle the frame. That was the first test. The second came at school. Lena received a call just before noon. It wasn't a complaint this time. It was confusion. Ms. Howard, the vice principal said, Caleb requested to switch out of his last elective. He says it's interfering with something. With what? Lena asked. He says, a mentorship. Lena's breath caught. She hadn't known Richard had already moved. That evening Richard explained. I called in a favor, he said. A vocational program tied to the district. Small class. Project-based. Hard deadlines. Caleb stared at him. You didn't ask me. No, Richard said. I evaluated you. Caleb laughed bitterly. I'm not some investment. Richard met his gaze. No. You're a liability pretending to be potential. I'm interested in the potential. The word stung. Lena flinched. Caleb's face flushed. You think you can just control everything? Caleb snapped. You think money fixes people? Richard didn't raise his voice. Money reveals people. Discipline changes them. Caleb pushed back from the table. I'm not doing this. Richard nodded once. You are. Or the system will do it for you. And the system is far less patient. Silence followed. Heavy. Pressurized. That night, Lena lay awake again. But this time the fear was different. It wasn't just about Caleb slipping away. It was about whether she was watching him be reshaped by someone whose past she didn't fully understand. The next week moved fast. Caleb attended the program. He complained at first. About the workload. About the people. About being treated like he mattered only if he produced results. Then the complaints changed. They don't let you hide, he muttered one night. Lena looked up. Is that bad? He didn't answer. What Lena didn't know, what Richard hadn't told her, was that the program director recognized Caleb's last name. Howard. It wasn't common. Not in certain circles. And when she pulled an old file, her expression changed. Because Caleb wasn't the first Howard she'd seen spiral. 2 days later, Richard received a call. He took it privately, wheeling into his office and closing the door. When he came out, his face was unreadable. Lena noticed anyway. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Richard hesitated. Just for a second. "Nothing," he said. "Yet." But that night, Lena found him staring at an old photograph on his desk. A younger man. Standing. Smiling. And beside him, a woman who looked unsettlingly familiar. Lena's pulse quickened. She knew that face. She had seen it before. In an old envelope. In a drawer she hadn't opened in years. And suddenly, the help she had begged for no longer felt accidental at all. The next morning, Lena arrived at the penthouse feeling a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Caleb had been quieter than usual during breakfast, poking at his oatmeal without meeting anyone's eyes. Richard, as always, remained calm, observing with that precise, measured attention that made her feel like every thought she had could be read before it even formed. "Do you understand why this is happening?" Richard asked, his voice low but deliberate, as if testing not just Caleb but her own understanding of the situation. Caleb shrugged, not trusting himself to answer. Lena could see the tension tightening his shoulders, the way his fingers fidgeted with the edges of the napkin. Richard leaned forward slightly. "Discipline is not punishment," he said. "It's awareness. Awareness allows you to recognize patterns before they destroy you. You're at a crossroads, Caleb, and you don't realize it yet." Lena's heart skipped a beat. That phrase, crossroads, felt heavier than anything Richard could have said about grades, school attendance, or consequences. It suggested that the choices Caleb made here would ripple far beyond the walls of the apartment, beyond the program, beyond even her ability to protect him. After breakfast, Lena helped Caleb pack his bag for the mentorship program. As they walked down the hall, Caleb glanced toward Richard, his expression unreadable. Lena could feel the unspoken tension building. The ride to the program was silent, the car's engine the only sound filling the space. Caleb stared out the window, watching the city pass, seemingly oblivious to her presence. She tried once, softly, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. When they arrived, the director, Ms. Landry, greeted them warmly, but there was a subtle firmness in her posture that mirrored Richard's influence. "Good to see you, Caleb. Ready to start fresh?" Caleb muttered something under his breath, clearly unimpressed. Lena, however, noticed the flicker of curiosity in his eyes, the first sign that perhaps this intervention, harsh as it seemed, was beginning to penetrate the wall he had built around himself. That evening, Lena returned to the penthouse alone. She moved quietly through the apartment, noticing details she hadn't before. The way Richard's books were aligned by color and height, the faint scent of cedar from the cabinet in the hallway, the way light fell across the floor just so. Richard didn't speak at first, merely watching her as she carried the dishes to the kitchen. Then he said softly, "You've done well so far. But this is just the beginning." Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure what "well" really meant in this context. Was it surviving the day without Caleb getting into trouble? Was it maintaining composure under Richard's scrutiny? She couldn't tell. Later that night, unable to sleep, Lena pulled out a worn photograph she had found months ago, an image of a woman with features eerily similar to her own, standing beside a younger Richard in a sunlit park. She had tucked it away in a drawer, never fully understanding why it felt so significant. Now, staring at it in the dim light, she realized the implications. This woman wasn't just a stranger. Something about her presence in Richard's past had shaped the man he had become, and perhaps unknowingly the role he was playing in her life now. A knock at the door startled her. She froze. It was Richard, wheeling silently into the room, expression neutral but eyes sharp. "Lena," he said, voice low, "there's something you need to see. And you need to understand it before you involve yourself further." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" He handed her a small envelope, worn at the edges, with her name scrawled in familiar handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were letters, faded and yellowed, addressed to Richard. They were written by the woman in the photograph. The words spoke of regret, missed opportunities and warnings, advice that had been ignored, with consequences that had reverberated through Richard's life ever since. Lena realized, with a sinking feeling, that she was no longer just helping Caleb navigate adolescence. She was stepping into a story far older and more complicated than she could have imagined. One that connected her past, Richard's past, and the fragile present they all now shared. And in that moment, Lena understood something chilling. Nothing about this intervention was random. Every detail, every rule, every quiet observation by Richard was deliberate. The question that clawed at her was simple and terrifying. Had she asked for help? Or had she been drawn into a web she didn't fully understand? Outside, the city lights flickered, indifferent to the secrets hidden in the penthouse. Inside, Lena felt the weight of history pressing down, knowing that the next decision she made could reshape not only Caleb's life but her own, and perhaps even Richard's in ways she could not yet imagine. And as she folded the letters back into the envelope, a sound from Caleb's room, a muffled thud followed by a soft curse, reminded her that the storm wasn't just in the past. It was waiting, growing, and ready to strike. The next day unfolded with a tension that felt stretched thin, like a wire pulled too tight. Lena barely slept. The letters Richard had shown her stayed vivid in her mind. The careful handwriting, the restrained emotion, the warnings written too late to matter. She moved through the morning routines quietly, watching Caleb from the corner of her eye. He was restless, distracted, tapping his foot at the table, checking the time even without his phone. "You're late," he muttered. "For what?" Lena asked. "For the program," he said. "They don't like excuses." That alone told her something had shifted. Richard observed from across the room. "That's correct," he said. "They don't." Caleb grabbed his jacket and hesitated at the door. For a second, Lena thought he might say something. Ask a question, push back, demand answers. Instead, he left without a word. The apartment felt too quiet after. Lena cleaned the kitchen slowly, deliberately, buying herself time. Finally, she turned to Richard. "You knew her," she said. It wasn't a question. Richard didn't deny it. "Yes." "How well?" Lena asked. "Well enough to regret certain choices," he replied. Lena folded her arms, steadying herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't relevant," Richard said. Then after a pause, "Until now." She felt a flicker of anger. "You don't get to decide when my life becomes relevant." Richard met her gaze evenly. "I didn't seek you out, Lena. You came to me." That stung because it was true. Still, she pressed on. "Those letters, they weren't just about you. They were about consequences. About patterns repeating." Richard's jaw tightened. "Yes. And now you're shaping my son," she said quietly. "Like you wish someone had shaped you." The room seemed to hold its breath. Richard exhaled slowly. "I'm trying to prevent a collision I've already lived through." Lena shook her head. "You can't control everything." "No," he agreed. "But I can see trajectories." The rest of the morning passed in uneasy silence. By afternoon, Lena received a call from the mentorship program. Miss Landry's voice was measured, professional, but strained. "Miss Howard," she said, "Caleb didn't show up for his final session today." Lena's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "He left the house." "He arrived," Miss Landry said, "stayed 20 minutes, then walked out." Lena thanked her and hung up, hands trembling. Richard was already moving, wheeling toward his office. "He didn't go home," he said calmly. "That means he went somewhere familiar." "Where?" Lena asked. Richard looked at her. "Somewhere connected to the person he's angry with." Lena grabbed her coat. "I'm coming." They found Caleb near the lake, sitting on the cold concrete steps by the water. His jacket was unzipped despite the wind. His shoulders were hunched, his face hard. "I knew you'd come," he said without looking up. Lena rushed forward. "Caleb, what are you doing? You scared me." He laughed bitterly. "Good. Maybe now you know how it feels." Richard stopped a few feet away, giving them space. "This isn't about fear," he said. "It's about direction." Caleb stood abruptly. "You don't get to talk to me like you know me." Richard didn't flinch. "I know anger. I know what happens when it becomes identity." Caleb's eyes flashed. "You think you're helping, but you're just controlling everything. You're turning my life into some project." "No," Richard said. "I'm offering you a choice." Caleb laughed again, louder this time. "What choice? Follow your rules or end up like everyone expects?" Lena stepped between them. "Caleb, please." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something cracked. "You brought him into our lives," he said. "You let him decide who I'm supposed to be." "That's not true," Lena said, voice shaking. "I did it because I was afraid." "Exactly," Caleb snapped. "You were afraid of me." The words hit harder than any accusation before. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. A patrol car rolled slowly along the road above the steps, lights off but watchful. Richard spoke quietly. "You're standing at the edge of something, Caleb. One step in the wrong direction and it won't matter what any of us want." Caleb stared at the water, jaw clenched. "Maybe I don't care." Lena felt panic rise. "Caleb, look at me." "You didn't?" And in that moment, standing between the lake, the city, and two men shaped by very different kinds of loss, Lena realized something terrifying. This wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about whether her son would choose to stay or disappear in plain sight. And she had no idea which way he was about to step. The wind off the lake cut straight through Lena's coat, but she barely felt it. All her attention was on Caleb, standing inches from the water's edge, his hands shoved deep into his pockets like he was anchoring himself to the ground. "Come sit," she said gently, patting the concrete step beside her. "Just for a minute." Caleb didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark water, rippling under the city lights. "If I sit, you'll start talking," he said. "And then I'll feel bad. And then I'll cave. And then nothing actually changes." Lena swallowed. "Something already has." He scoffed. "Yeah. Now I'm monitored, scheduled, evaluated. Like I'm a problem that needs managing." Richard stayed a few steps back, deliberately silent. He knew this part wasn't his. Lena stood and moved closer, careful not to startle him. "You are not a problem," she said. "You're my son." "That's the problem," Caleb snapped, finally turning toward her. "Everything I do reflects back on you. Every mistake. Every look I get at school. Every time someone expects me to mess up, I see it in their eyes, and I hear it in yours even when you don't say it." Her chest tightened. "That's not fair." "I know," he said bitterly, "but it's real." He stepped back from the edge and paced, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like I'm already guilty of something I haven't done yet. Like I'm just waiting for the moment everyone says, 'There it is. We knew it.'" Richard finally spoke. "That feeling doesn't go away by running." Caleb shot him a glare. "You don't know that." "I do," Richard replied calmly. "Because I ran straight into a wall." Caleb laughed sharply. "You keep talking like you know me." "I know what happens when anger becomes the only place you feel in control," Richard said. "You start testing how far you can go before someone stops you." Caleb's laughter faded. "So what? You stop me? Lock me down? Strip everything away until I behave?" "No," Richard said. "I let you see where the road actually ends." Lena watched them, heart pounding. Something in Caleb's posture shifted, not softer but less rigid, like he was listening despite himself. "I didn't walk out of that program because it was hard," Caleb said quietly. "I walked out because they looked at me like a case study, like I was already halfway gone." Richard nodded. Then you noticed the wrong thing. Caleb frowned. What? They weren't watching you fail, Richard said. They were watching you decide. Silence stretched between them. A car passed overhead, tires hissing against wet pavement. The city kept moving, unaware of how fragile this moment was. Caleb exhaled slowly. You don't get it, he said. If I mess up again, it's not just detention or lectures. It's records. It's labels. It's stuff that sticks. Lena stepped closer. That's why we're here. Before it sticks. Caleb turned to her, eyes glossy but defiant. Then why does it feel like you don't trust me? She felt the words like a punch. Because I'm scared, she said honestly. Not of who you are. Of what could happen to you if no one steps in. He looked away. You chose him over me. No, she said firmly. I chose help over silence. Richard moved closer, careful not to crowd him. You're not trapped, Caleb. But you are at a decision point. One where walking away feels powerful, but costs you more than you realize. Caleb stared at the water again. And if I don't do what you say? Richard didn't hesitate. Then the system will decide for you. And you won't like its rules. Lena reached for Caleb's sleeve. This time he didn't pull away. Come home, she said softly. Just come home tonight. He hesitated. Long enough that her heart started racing again. Then finally he nodded once. Tonight, he said. Not forever. That's enough, she whispered. They walked back to the car in silence. Halfway there, Caleb stopped suddenly. You still haven't told me, he said, turning to Richard. Told you what? Richard asked. Why you're really doing this, Caleb said. This isn't charity. And it's not just about me. Richard held his gaze. For the first time his composure slipped, just slightly. You're right, he said. It's not just about you. Lena's pulse quickened. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Then who is it about? Richard didn't answer. He turned toward the car instead. And as Lena followed them, a cold realization settled in her chest. The truth Caleb was circling wasn't behind them anymore. It was waiting, closer than she was ready for. The car ride back felt longer than the drive out. Caleb sat in the back seat, staring out the window, jaw tight. Lena kept both hands on the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe evenly. Richard rode in silence, his presence filling the car without a word. Streetlights passed in steady intervals, casting brief flashes of light across their faces, like moments of clarity that vanished just as quickly. No one spoke until they reached the building. Inside the penthouse, the quiet felt heavier than before. Not peaceful. Loaded. Caleb headed straight for his room without asking permission this time. Lena watched him go, then turned to Richard. You can't keep dodging his question, she said quietly. He knows something's off. Richard didn't respond immediately. He wheeled toward the window, the city stretched wide below him. I was hoping to avoid this conversation until he stabilized. Stabilized from what? Lena asked. Richard looked at her then. Really looked at her. From the realization that his life has been shaped by decisions made long before he ever made one himself. Her stomach tightened. You're talking in circles. He nodded once. Then it's time I stop. He motioned toward the dining table. Sit. The word wasn't a command this time. It was an invitation. Lena sat, heart pounding. Richard reached into a drawer beside the table and pulled out a thin folder. Not new. The edges were worn, the corners softened by time. You recognized the woman in the photograph, he said. You just didn't want to say it out loud. Lena swallowed. Her name was Eleanor. Richard's fingers paused on the folder. Then you do remember her. She disappeared when I was young, Lena said, voice tight. People said she left. Some said she couldn't handle responsibility. Others said she chose ambition over family. Richard opened the folder. Inside were documents, old letters, and a single hospital record. She didn't leave, he said quietly. She was pushed out. Lena's breath caught. By who? By fear, Richard said. By a system that had no patience for mistakes. And by me. The words landed hard. You? Lena whispered. Richard met her gaze without flinching. She worked for one of my companies. She was brilliant, disorganized, late sometimes, too honest for her own good. Lena's hands trembled. She was my mother. Richard nodded. I know. The room felt like it tilted. You knew, Lena said. Not angry. Stunned. You knew who I was when you hired me. Yes. How long? She asked. From the first week, he said. You have her cadence. The way you pause before answering. The way you carry stress like it's your responsibility to absorb it. Lena stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You let me beg you for help, she said, voice rising. You let me feel desperate. I let you ask, Richard said evenly. Because help only works when it's chosen. She shook her head. You were watching me. I was watching patterns, he corrected. The same ones that cost Eleanor everything. Lena's eyes burned. What does that make, Caleb? Richard hesitated. Just a fraction too long. A second chance, he said. The word sent a chill through her. You're not allowed to use my son to fix your guilt, she said sharply. I'm not, Richard replied. I'm trying to stop history from repeating itself. And what if he doesn't want that? She demanded. What if he wants to choose his own way even if it scares you? Richard's jaw tightened. Then he'll choose with full awareness. Something Eleanor was never given. Silence filled the space. From down the hall, a door creaked. Footsteps. Caleb stood there, eyes moving between them. He had heard enough. So this is it, he said slowly. I'm part of some unfinished business. Lena turned to him. Caleb. No, he said. Let him talk. Richard didn't look away. Your grandmother made a mistake, he said. I made a worse one by not protecting her when it mattered. Caleb's face hardened. So now you're protecting me? Yes, Richard said. Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't even know me. I know what happens when potential is labeled a problem, Richard said. And I know what happens when anger fills the gap. Caleb shook his head. You think this makes you some kind of guardian? No, Richard said quietly. It makes me accountable. The word hung in the air. Caleb turned to Lena. Did you know? She shook her head, tears finally breaking free. Not until now. Caleb took a step back. Then you both made choices without me. That ends now, Lena said quickly. Whatever happens next, we decide together. Caleb looked at Richard one last time. I'm not your redemption. Richard nodded. I know. Then stop acting like my future belongs to you, Caleb said. Richard wheeled back slightly, creating space. It never did. The tension didn't disappear. It shifted. Caleb retreated to his room again, closing the door with controlled force. Lena sank back into her chair, hands shaking. Outside, the city continued its steady rhythm. Inside, 3 lives stood at a breaking point, past mistakes exposed, motives laid bare, and one question now impossible to ignore. What happens when help comes with history? And who gets to decide what healing is supposed to look like? The next morning, Lena woke to silence. The city outside was just beginning to stir, but inside the penthouse, everything felt suspended, like the air itself was holding its breath. She moved quietly through the kitchen, noting that Caleb hadn't come down for breakfast yet. She found him sitting by the window, knees drawn up, staring at the streets below. His face was calm, but there was a tension there she hadn't seen before. Morning, she said softly, perching on the edge of the couch. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't turn. You don't have to talk, Lena said. Not yet. He exhaled slowly. I know. The silence stretched, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt fragile, like waiting for glass to shatter. Richard entered from the hallway quietly, his wheelchair gliding over the polished floor. He paused when he saw Caleb, then looked at Lena. "He's processing," he said. "Leave him. For now." Lena nodded. "I will." Richard wheeled over to the kitchen and began preparing coffee with methodical precision. The smell filled the apartment, grounding her. For a while none of them spoke. Lena watched Caleb shift slightly, hands clasped around his knees. Richard sipped his coffee without looking up. And Lena realized that the tension between them had changed. It wasn't just fear or defiance anymore, it was uncertainty. Finally, Caleb spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think she would have wanted this?" Lena's heart skipped. "Who?" "Eleanor," he said. "My grandmother, my mom's mom. She made mistakes. But do you think she would have wanted me to end up the same way?" Lena hesitated, searching for the right words. "I think she would have wanted someone to notice, and to try to fix things before it was too late." Caleb looked out the window again. "So you're both trying to fix things for me? Using my life as a continuation of old mistakes?" Richard's voice was calm, deliberate. "Not to fix you. To give you a choice." Caleb laughed bitterly. "Choice, sure. Easy to offer when you're not the one living it." Richard wheeled closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "You think I don't know what it feels like to be trapped in someone else's expectations? To have anger define you when you're barely 16? I've lived it, Caleb. And I refuse to let it destroy you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then why now? Why me?" Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch, letting Caleb feel the weight of the truth without softening it. "You're the only one standing between history repeating itself," Richard said finally, "because the rest of the world doesn't care. They see labels. They see anger. They don't see the kid behind it." Caleb's eyes flicked toward him. "And you do." Richard didn't blink. "I do. But I can't make you choose the right path. Only guide you toward seeing it." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. She had begged for help, but now she understood the cost. Caleb wasn't just her son anymore. He was a living reminder of old regrets, of mistakes Eleanor made, of Richard's past he had never fully confronted. Caleb stood, finally moving toward the door. "I don't know if I want guidance or control," he said quietly. "Maybe I just want to be left alone." Lena stepped forward, gently touching his arm. "You're not alone, Caleb. Not anymore." He didn't respond immediately, but he didn't pull away either. Richard watched silently. Then, as Caleb left the room, he spoke just loud enough for both of them to hear. "You'll see soon enough. Choice doesn't feel like freedom until the consequences arrive." The words lingered in the apartment long after Caleb's door clicked shut. Lena sank back onto the couch, hands trembling. She realized with a sinking certainty that the coming days would test not just Caleb but her, and Richard, far beyond anything they had faced so far. And somewhere deep in the back of her mind, she felt the first hint of fear that this test would reveal truths none of them were ready to face. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And Lena knew it would change everything. The evening air in the penthouse was thick with unspoken words. Caleb had retreated to his room after dinner, leaving Lena and Richard in the quiet that only the city's hum could penetrate. Lena paced the kitchen, wringing her hands, trying to make sense of everything she had learned. The letters, the photograph, the hidden history connecting her family to Richard. Richard remained seated near the window, staring out at the city lights, the glow reflecting faintly in his eyes. He didn't speak until Lena stopped pacing and leaned against the counter. "You're thinking about him," he said quietly. "About Caleb. About what's next." "I'm thinking about everything," Lena said, voice tight. "About you. About my mother. About all of it." Richard nodded. "History has a way of demanding attention whether we want it or not." Lena swallowed hard. Do you ever regret helping me?" Richard looked at her then, his gaze sharp. "Regret isn't the right word. Concern, yes. Responsibility, yes. But regret implies I had another choice. I didn't." She wanted to press further, but a sharp thump from Caleb's room made her freeze. "He's not going to stay silent forever," Richard said. "And when he speaks it will shake things up. Maybe more than you think." The apartment fell quiet again, punctuated only by the faint sound of the refrigerator humming. Lena's mind raced. She had spent years trying to protect Caleb, and now, with Richard's intervention, she realized protection was no longer about shielding him. It was about preparing him. Preparing him for a confrontation he didn't yet understand. Later, Lena found herself in Caleb's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, knees drawn up, staring at the floor. "I didn't leave to get away from you," he said finally, not looking up. "I just needed to think." "You can think here," Lena said softly, sitting beside him. "You don't have to run." Caleb's laugh was bitter, short. "Run. That's all I've ever done. Run from mistakes, run from expectations, run from myself." Lena placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not running anymore. Not while I'm here. And not while Richard is here. He's trying to guide you, not trap you." He finally looked at her, eyes wary. "Guide me, or use me?" "Neither," she said. "He's trying to stop history from repeating itself. With you." Caleb shook his head. "History," he trailed off, voice softening. "I don't know if I want to know it yet." "You will," Lena said gently. "And when you do, you'll understand why we've done what we had to." The hours passed slowly. Eventually, Caleb leaned back, exhaustion finally softening his features. Lena left him to rest, her mind swirling with everything Richard had revealed, everything Caleb had hinted at, and the storm of emotions building between them. Later that night, Lena stood at the window watching the city lights flicker below. She realized something she hadn't admitted before. She was afraid. Afraid that no matter how hard she tried, the consequences of the past, and the choices of the present, might be too much to navigate. Richard wheeled silently into the room, breaking her reverie. "You're afraid," he said simply. "Yes," Lena admitted. "For him. For all of us." "Good," he said almost sternly. "Fear keeps you aware. Fear makes you deliberate. But don't let it paralyze you. Caleb needs us to act, not react." She nodded, trying to steady her breathing. Outside, the wind rustled against the glass, a subtle reminder that the world kept moving regardless of the fragile lives inside the penthouse. And Lena knew deep down that tomorrow would be the day nothing could remain hidden. Secrets would surface. Choices would collide. And Caleb would be forced to confront truths that would change him forever. For the first time since this journey began, Lena wondered if all of them, the boy, herself, and even Richard, would survive what was coming next. And somewhere in the darkness, she feared the answer might not be what she hoped. Morning came heavy and gray, with clouds pressing low over the city. The penthouse felt smaller than usual, each sound, Caleb's footsteps, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, magnified against the tense silence. Lena moved through the apartment slowly, her nerves taut. Today felt different. She could sense it even before Caleb emerged from his room. When he finally appeared, the change was subtle but undeniable. His shoulders were squared, his movements deliberate. His eyes, which had often flickered with defiance or doubt, now held a quiet intensity, as if he had made a decision he hadn't yet shared. "Morning," Lena said, trying to keep her voice light. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He grabbed his backpack, zipped it up, and slung it over one shoulder. "We need to talk," he said, voice low but firm. Richard wheeled in from the living area, observing them both. "I'll step out if you need privacy," he said. Caleb shook his head. "No. He needs to hear this too." Lena felt her stomach knot. She had been waiting for this moment, fearing it, hoping it might bring clarity. "I know why you've been involved," Caleb began, his voice gaining strength. "And I know some of it has to do with Eleanor. With history repeating itself." Richard nodded slowly. "That's correct. But it's not my history," Caleb continued, "and I'm not her. I can't I won't be defined by what she did, or what you think she couldn't handle. Lena reached out instinctively. Caleb. No, he said, holding up a hand. Let me finish. Richard remained silent, letting the boy speak. I've been angry, Caleb admitted. Not just at school or at the rules or even at you, Mom. I've been angry at everything I can't control. And maybe that's Eleanor's shadow too. Lena felt a lump in her throat. You're not alone in this, she whispered. Caleb shook his head. I need to do this on my terms. Not because someone's past demands it. Not because it's convenient for anyone else. I need to take responsibility, for me. Richard leaned back slightly, a flicker of approval in his eyes. And you will, he said softly. But you won't do it blindly. You'll see the path clearly and you'll choose it knowingly. Caleb exhaled sharply, a long, steadying breath. Then I'll try. But not because it's expected. Because it's mine. Lena closed the distance and hugged him tightly. He stiffened at first, then relaxed just enough for her to feel the weight of relief seep through her. Richard wheeled closer, nodding. Good. That's the first step. Caleb pulled back and looked at him. I'm not your project, he said firmly. No, Richard replied. You're not. You're the only person who can decide your life. I'm just a guide, not a puppeteer. For the first time in weeks, the tension between them eased. Not entirely, but enough that Lena felt hope stirring. Then, as if to remind them that the past never fully leaves, a soft knock echoed from the penthouse door. Lena moved to answer it. Outside stood a courier holding a small, plain envelope, no return address. Caleb's eyes flicked to it, curiosity sharpening. He took the envelope cautiously, breaking the seal. Inside was a single photograph, older, worn, and faded slightly. It showed Eleanor standing beside a younger Richard, her hand resting on a briefcase, looking determined but tense. Caleb's eyes widened. Lena's heart sank. Richard's expression was unreadable. I didn't send that, he said quietly. Caleb turned the photograph over. On the back, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, were 4 words. Asterisk, the truth changes everything. Asterisk. Silence fell. Heavy. Absolute. And in that moment, Lena understood something terrifying. The final reckoning, the one that would reveal secrets, force decisions, and test loyalties, was no longer a question of if. It was already here. And none of them would leave unchanged. The penthouse was unusually quiet that evening. The city outside shimmered with lights, oblivious to the storm gathering within. Lena sat on the couch, holding the photograph Caleb had found, her fingers tracing the edges, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Caleb stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the skyline as if answers might appear in the neon blur below. Richard remained near the dining table, his wheelchair angled toward both of them, every movement deliberate, controlled. This changes everything, Caleb said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, edged with frustration and something else Lena couldn't immediately name, curiosity maybe, or fear. Richard didn't answer right away. He let the words hang, letting Caleb feel the weight of them. Then he spoke, calm but firm. Only if you let it. The truth itself is neutral. It's how we respond to it that defines us. Caleb turned sharply. Neutral? You expect me to treat decades of secrets, of lies, as neutral? Lena watched him, heart aching. Caleb, it's not neutral. But it's ours now. It's something we can face together. Caleb's gaze softened momentarily, flicking toward her, before snapping back to Richard. Why now? Why all of this? You could have kept it hidden like everyone else did. Richard's eyes, usually impassive, darkened with a mix of regret and resolve. Because hiding it solves nothing. Eleanor's story doesn't end with her. It continues through you. And you deserve to know it before it shapes you without your consent. The words hit Caleb hard. He sank onto the couch beside Lena, the photograph clutched in his hands. All my life I felt, like I'm inheriting someone else's mistakes. Like my anger, my choices, my failures aren't even mine. Lena reached for his hand. They are yours, Caleb. Every one of them. But knowing the truth gives you a chance to break the cycle. Caleb's grip on the photo tightened. And if I can't? Richard leaned forward slightly. Then you'll learn anyway. But at least this way you have a choice in how it happens. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The weight of the past, the complexity of their relationships, and the uncertainty of the future pressed down on all three of them. Finally, Caleb exhaled slowly, a sound that seemed to release a fraction of the tension he had carried for weeks. I want to try, he said. But I want it to be on my terms, not as a continuation of someone else's story. Richard inclined his head. Fair. And me? Lena asked softly. Where do I fit into this? You're the anchor, Caleb said, surprising her. The one who keeps me tethered when I feel like floating away. I've been angry at you, at Richard, but I see now you were trying to keep me safe. Lena's eyes blurred with tears. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she hugged him tightly, feeling the first real sense of relief in weeks. Richard wheeled closer. Then we move forward together, he said. With awareness, with choice, and with the knowledge that the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Caleb nodded, setting the photograph down on the coffee table. But it informs it, he said. I can't ignore it. I can't pretend it doesn't exist. And now, at least, I know the whole story. The three of them sat in quiet solidarity for a long moment, listening to the distant hum of the city, feeling the fragile peace settle over them. Then Caleb looked up, a small, wry smile breaking through his usual tension. So, what now? Richard allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Now we live. Now we make choices. Now we shape the story that belongs to us, not to anyone else. Lena laughed softly, a sound that felt like sunlight after a storm. And maybe we start by having dinner together without drama, she said. Caleb chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing. That sounds acceptable. For the first time in a long while, the apartment felt like a home. Not perfect, not free of past shadows, but alive, breathing, and ready for what came next. Outside, the city lights flickered, oblivious and indifferent. But inside, three lives intertwined, scarred by history but stronger for it, looked forward together. And in that quiet triumph, the kind that doesn't need fanfare, Lena understood something simple yet profound. The heart's true strength is not in never breaking, but in choosing to keep moving forward after it does. The story wasn't over. But for the first time they were ready to write it together. The end.